Welcome, everybody. This is the morning meeting. Dan, Sean, and I will break down the day for you and get your participation. If you'd like to be part of the conversation here on the two-way platform, raise your electronic hand. We'd love to get to you. Lots of gutter chat stuff in the last couple of days, particularly on YouTube. Thank you if you're watching on YouTube. Our audience grows every day, which we're really grateful for. We're not grateful for garbage in the tweets, in the chat. So please, peace, love, and understanding. This is a different kind of platform. We've been very heartened over the last few days to hear from Harris supporters who are part of the two-way community, who are dealing with the loss better, they say, than they think they would have if they were not here to hear from Trump folks. We'll continue to ask Trump supporters to understand that Harris supporters are not just disappointed, they're crushed in a lot of ways, and try to grapple with the meaning of this. And so that's what we're going to try to continue to do. We'll update you on the news. We'll talk about this and that's, but we're also trying to make sure that everybody stays together here as we head towards Donald Trump's inauguration and a transition with what will likely be a Republican majority in both the House and the Senate. The House is not done yet, but analysts on both sides believe that they will get the majority eventually, not by a lot. The Senate is a Republican majority, but the McCormick Casey battle in Pennsylvania, which is likely to go to McCormick, but not quite done fully yet, no concession from Bob Casey, is hugely important because he would be the 53rd vote. And 53 is really important because if it's 52, that gives Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins veto power over a lot of stuff. So keep watching that. Keep watching that race, but it's likely to be 53, which gives them the cushion they need. 11 o'clock this morning, Joe Biden, Rose Garden speech, explains what happened in the election to the nation. We'll see what kind of tone he strikes and what he says. I think we all have our expectations about what will happen there, but let's wait and watch it. Exact same time, House Republicans will be on a video call or a group call talking about their plans for the new Congress. And the expectation is that Speaker Johnson will maintain his job. Noon, House Democrats have their call. Some hope amongst House Democrats that they could somehow keep the majority, but it's unlikely. And so they're going to have to figure out what to do. The expectation is their leaders will all stay on, but it's not 100%. And then the White House briefing at 1:30. Okay, big topics for us. The Trump transition, we'll talk about that today. The meaning of the election. And if you look at the journalism, you see two categories of things, basically. One is the inside baseball stuff. The Harris people blaming the Biden people blaming the Harris people, what happened with the ground game that was so vaunted, etc. And then there's what's to me of more interest, which is the big picture of just how significant the Trump realignment is, or at least appears to be. And the meaning of this is super important because, for instance, there's now talk in Republican circles, you didn't hear much of this before the election, that Alito and Thomas will retire, allowing Donald Trump to put two more justices on. So he'll have named five of the nine. And what happens to Justice Sotomayor? Relatively young by Supreme Court justice standards. But what if she's unable to continue in the office? And we have another situation where Democrats will say, why didn't she retire when there was a Democratic president? The transition, which is where I want to start. Transitions are really hard, and every president I've ever covered gets frustrated. I can't get people confirmed. It takes forever. The background checks take forever. The confirmation process takes forever. I got a bunch of people running the departments that I don't know. And even getting the White House staff organized, which doesn't require Senate confirmation, is difficult. If you look at the people around the Trump transition, he's superstitious and it was a weird campaign, so he didn't start. They didn't do as much work and they didn't engage with the government apparatus that's supposed to help with the transition. So, Sean, what's the sort of optimistic case that the Trump team is going to hit the ground running on January 20th? Or are you concerned, as some of my sources are, that there's a lot to do and different power structures within the transition team and outside the transition team that can also slow things down?
It's a great question. It's an interesting question, and I'll answer it by this. It depends on whether you're grading on a curve or not. And what I mean by that is, I think he's going to be much better suited than we were in 2016. I literally walked in the office the morning after the election, and people were like, I mean, what do we do? Where do we go? There was no sense. I mean, and obviously he pushed aside Chris Christie. And so we had to remake our transition team. I think that there's a lot better structure in place than there was before. And that's why I'm not trying to be demeaning, but I say grading on a curve. I think it's a very different way how he's going to organize things. He's much better than it was in 2016. I think you're going to have people much more committed to getting things out the door. The day one is going to look vastly different. He will have a lot ready to sign, to implement, etc. They'll have it more vetted. It'll be and there'll be a lot of fast and furious things. So I have a feeling this is going to go a much smoother, but it may not be, pretty like it would be on the other side in terms of the institutions all set up. So better, but still untraditional.
Do you assume that Susie Wiles will be White House Chief of Staff?
I would think that to me is it is hers to say no to. I think based on everything I know and that I hear, if I had money to put down and I'm cheap and I don't do that, I would put some decent money on Susie.
I would too. I can't think of an example though of someone going from running a campaign immediately to chief of staff. And maybe I'm forgetting an example. But the chief of staff
But
is they're both grinding jobs, right? They're both really
well, but
difficult.
again, that's why I'm saying it's still non-traditional. Like he's going to bring in people still and do things he doesn't care. And
Yeah.
and
No, no,
and
I understand.
so
I'm just saying it seems to me if I look at the universe of people besides the president elect himself, the universe of people there, the only one who I think could run a linear transition with all the knowledge that's required of what Trump wants, personnel, management, etc. She seems to be the person, but I just can't imagine that she doesn't need a break.
yeah, but that's the mentality. I can tell you, having, I spent 6 years at the RNC where it's kind of nonstop. And I thought to myself, okay, phew, but when you get that opportunity
Right.
to go serve at that level, I mean, it's literally, I am not the most athletic person, but I can imagine somebody coming call and say, hey, we want to bring you up to the majors to play ball. You're like, okay, I'm in. And you
Right.
don't think you're going to play in the league that long. I mean, press secretary, White House chief of staff, you mentally say to yourself, okay, I can do that for a year and then I'll be done. And so she's got older children. I mean, I don't think she has the same family concerns that a lot of people have. If they have younger children, perhaps.
Right.
Um, she's done a lot professionally. I think this would be a huge feather in her cap. I just, like I said, for every reason, including the trust that he has in her, I would be shocked. And I would believe it would only be because she doesn't want to do it.
Yeah.
Um,
I
uh,
think she will do it. I think she will do it. I just wonder about her stamina, or not her stamina, but just the complexity of needing a rest. Dan, we've seen bad transitions. We've seen transitions where they took all the W's off the keyboards in the OEOB, and
Yep.
obviously the transition from Obama to Trump wasn't great, and from Trump to Biden wasn't great. We've seen now both the president and the vice president pledge this. Do you imagine that your friends who work in the OEOB and the West Wing will be enthusiastically helpful to the Trump transition?
They won't be enthusiastic, but they'll be helpful. I just don't see that kind of same childish, as you say, the famous, Clinton Gore people popping the W's off the keyboard in 2000. And I think it often takes you take direction from your leaders. And I think not only is Joe Biden going to be cooperative, but most of that senior staff is kind of, grizzled veterans of Washington who have been around for a very long time. And I just don't see them going out the door like that. And so I think they will be, cooperative. They'll put on a smile. I think the question is how much the Trump people want to cooperate with them. I don't say that, in a snarky way. I just think a lot of them have been there. They were just there 4 years ago. I think they have an idea of what they want to do. And so to what extent they're going to ask for help and whether or not they go through the formal channel of a government provided transition office and infrastructure or choose to run it themselves. Again, I don't say that to be snarky. Like
right.
maybe that is what future campaigns do. I think will be anyone's guess. And I think, the other part of this, as you said and Sean said, is Trump, when he went in the first time, really had no idea how government worked and what the levers were to pull and kind of just all the things he didn't know. And now he does. And just like George W. Bush knew from his father and Dick Cheney knew from years in government, I think it'll be very different this time.
Yeah, can I just add? I think there was that pettiness when George W. Bush came in that I don't think is going to exist. I think that Joe Biden will be very clear with his staff, and I also think there's a level of maturity of those people.
Yep.
They don't they want to be seen. Biden has always been big about legacy. He's going to make it very clear to the staff. I think you have a lot of grown-ups that work there that are going to be very clear. We want to go down in history as leading a strong transition. I think Obama, that I wrote in my first book, whether it was Josh Earnest or other folks around the administration, they were extremely kind, helpful during our first transition. But I agree with Dan. The vibe from most of these folks is, hey, we don't, no offense, this isn't we don't need help. We know what we need to do. We know how to do it. And therefore, thank you, but no.
I want to talk a little bit more about personnel, and then and the transition, and I want to move to the meaning of the election and the circular firing squad. One of the most incredible and underappreciated and reported achievements of the Biden administration is the commitment to excellence and diversity. They did better far and away than any previous administration of finding great people who look like America. Donald Trump, I believe, doesn't have the same concern. Doesn't mean there won't be any diversity, but if he said, "Hey, we're going to announce 3 cabinet appointments today, they're all white men," he's not going to say, and no one around him is going to say, "Oh, we can't possibly do that. We have to have diversity in every announcement." I think the press secretary will be a woman. I think the chief of staff will be a woman. I think you'll see a lot of white men in a lot of big jobs. I also think you'll see fewer, and other people have reported this, and I believe it's true. You'll see fewer retired military people because he didn't have a great experience with them in the first term. I think you'll see a lot of business people, and I think you'll see a lot of people with electoral experience at a very high level, not a low level. Sean, thoughts on that?
I'll give you a B. I think the retired military folks, I think there are people like Keith Kellogg, for example, that I think
Yeah.
Like there's I think it's anyway, I will tell you, there's a lot of people with military experience, the Tom Cottons, maybe not the flag level, but even a lot of the flags around him that I think were on the campaign. What happened last time was really interesting. The dirty secret about some of the folks that he ended up not liking, well known, right? It was very, very MAGA people that pushed them onto him. And I think there are certain, so I actually think the way that this
let me fix what I said. There'll be plenty of retired military. He won't take people he doesn't know previously because they're from central casting because they have a military background.
Correct.
Cotton, according to Axios, took himself out, which surprised me because I thought he was going to be Secretary of Defense. But there'll be plenty of retired military, but there'll only be people he knows.
Right. And I to be honest with you, Tom's personal, like, just he's got a young family and blah blah blah. Like I wasn't shocked by that because of what he has said previously on some other things. I think we talked about the House. That's critical. If it's a 3-seat majority, a guy like Mike Waltz, who I think would be awesome in a lot of things. Again, people are going to have to spend a lot of time, like on Florida law. How quick could DeSantis call a special election? Yep. Because Johnson doesn't, first of all, I'm not certain. I think Johnson's clearly the front runner for speaker, but there's a couple, we get a 3-seat majority. We'll see. That being said, I think this is going to be interesting because how that plays out matters. And obviously, again, you look at the Senate, there's certain people, what's that Republican governor, what's the rule about replacing them, et cetera, is going to come into play with a lot of these folks. I agree with you. The diversity thing wasn't an issue in 2016, meaning that was never a conversation until the very end, when a couple people tried to insert themselves saying, here's what I offer. You guys haven't said this. This is reason I want you to hire me. I don't think so. I agree with that. He's not going to care. He didn't then, and he won't now. But I do on the rest of the thing. I don't care if you identify as a woman. If you're not a woman, you're not going to become press secretary.
Yeah. Dan, anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, one thing I'll be curious about, because Bill Clinton did this very well, was he stocked diversity in kind of sub departments, leadership positions sprinkled in government of people that were getting ready to run for office. Bill Richardson would be a good example, right? A future Latino star. And, throughout the Clinton administration, Blacks, Latinos, Asian, women, Clinton was always thinking about the party and who that next generation would be. given the progress that Trump made, I will be really curious if some of the political people around him start thinking about how do we lock this into the party for those 26, 28, 30 elections, and bring some people in whose goal is in 2 or 3 years to go home and run, and we'll give them a platform to do it.
Okay. We'll talk a lot more about personnel. I did reporting of it before the election on both sides, but I've been busy and resting for the last 24 hours. So we'll come back to that as a big topic for us about who's going to serve, and our focus will be not just on the parlor game of who's up and who's down and which person's getting which job, but what it means in terms of policy, what it means in terms of the vision that Donald Trump has, and the symbolism of, is he going to pick people who at all reach out to the center? I do believe, as I think I've said here before, I certainly have said it some places, I do believe he's going to reach out. I think the picks he makes will be reassuring to Wall Street and to the CEOs and to Silicon Valley and to his supporters in Congress. I think he will satisfy a lot of constituencies with his picks. All right, on the issue of the meaning of the election, Donald Trump was outspent badly. He was the big loser in earned media. I don't think you don't have to be from Mar-a-Lago to objectively say, and there have been studies too, he was creamed in the coverage by the traditional media. So if you're losing paid media and earned media, and you're demonized, and you win, not just win, but you win overwhelmingly in the electoral college, about as big an electoral college win as could be imagined. If you win the popular vote, put the chart up, please. Great chart in Financial Times. In all but 2 states, Donald Trump got a higher percentage. You can't read this too clearly, but you see the arrows. In all but 2 states, I think it's Washington and Utah, he got a higher percentage of the vote in 2024 than he did in 2020. That's incredible. I need to dig more into this. You can take it down. I don't think anyone's ever done that, ever. Um, and his improvement, if the exit polls even directionally correct, he improved with a bunch of groups. So that's a mandate, and that's a testament to something. And so the question is, what do Democrats think it's the testament to? Okay, Barack Obama in his statement yesterday latched onto what a lot of Democrats are latching onto. COVID leads to inflation, leads to incumbent parties losing. That's better than saying the people who voted for Trump are garbage. That's better than saying Trump tricked them through propaganda, his voters. But to me, it's not that great because, first of all, they claimed they were going to win. And second, it doesn't really tell you anything about whether the Democratic Party needs to improve. Now, you have some, even though I think the media is completely, so far, completely not owning up to its role. We'll get to that probably some other episode. Most Democrats are not. They're either shell-shocked or they're blaming various things, including Barack Obama blaming the COVID and inflation. So far, there's a handful of Democrats who seem to be striving for some explanation. It's a little bit more profound. Put up the tweet, please. So this is a tweet from a Democratic member of Congress named Richie Torres. Dan, explain to folks who Richie Torres is and why he's a distinctive member of the Democratic caucus in the House.
Yeah, I mean, he's a House member from New York, and House members tend to be more sensitive to political movement because their districts are smaller. They're up every 2 years, and he has been unafraid to push back on the left. And here you go. I mean, he is saying it pretty bluntly what he thinks. Folks in the suburbs are more focused on this cultural pushback than some of their brethren in urban centers and other areas.
Yeah. So again, you can see from this tweet, this was an explanation that would go over very big in Mar-a-Lago. They would agree with a lot of this, that the Democrats have allowed themselves to alienate the working class, to be seen as the party of the far left on social media, on cable news. One establishment Republican I was communicating with yesterday, who's no fan of Donald Trump, but is also no fan of the left, said if you look down your nose at people long enough, eventually they will punch you in the nose. And I think that's a pretty good explanation of what happened. Sean, what do you think is it I mean, it's this way, how big a problem is it for Democrats in November and December if they keep if Richie Torres is a lonely voice, is it important for the party as they pick a party chair, which they'll do early next year, as they go on the press and explain into the media and the public what happened? How important is it for them in the next 2 months to find a good explanation, or does it not matter till next year?
As a Republican, I think it's great. As an analyst, to answer your question, I will go back to I think one of the greatest things that we did for the party in 12 was the Growth and Opportunity Project. I think there's a lot of people who misread what we did and what the takeaways were, but there was a lot of mechanical recommendations, not just about what the RNC should do, but because that's where a lot of people missed the boat. It was not about what the RNC, it's about what the party needs to do writ large. And the parties are not necessarily the buildings and the 200 people that work in DC. So I would argue that to your question, if they don't figure this out, willing to take a look at themselves, how they do business, to your point, I mean, you spend that much money, you talk about your ground game. There's a lot of mechanical things that they need to look at. And then to your point about what Richie Torres said, Bernie Sanders echoed the same thing. If they don't get this right, as a Republican, I'm fine with that. But I think as a party, that's a problem for them. And the earlier that you do it, the better. We took a lot of heat for the Growth and Opportunity Project internally. People saying, why are we airing our dirty laundry in public? And the problem is that you have to be willing to have those conversations with yourselves, with your family, if you're going to fix yourselves. And so how soon they come to that realization is important, because you've got a midterm in 2 years.
Yeah. I mean, Bernie Sanders is a little different, right? He's about economics.
Yeah.
Richie Torres is talking about cultural.
Right. But I think, you're right. But I think they were tethered. I mean,
Yeah, no question.
Yeah.
More, yeah.
So Dan, when you're in the wilderness, and it appears they'll be shut out, they will not control the House, the Senate, or the White House. So your options for leaders to be on television, to be formulating ideas about what the party stands for: the DNC chair,
Yeah.
The minority leaders,
Yeah.
the past presidents,
Yeah.
and people who are thinking of running for president in 2 years. So,
Yep.
Governors and senators and House members and whoever. Leaving the abstract categories aside, if you were the chief of staff at the DNC, who are the people out there who now or in January, and I think they'll be paralyzed till January and maybe beyond, but who are the people you would say we need to get them booked on TV more, that we need to get them on Fox, and we need to get them on Meet the Press, and we need to get them on Two-Way? Who are the people you'd like to see out there who you think can not freak out the left, but also represent what Richie Torres is talking about?
Look, I think it's governors, because they're outside Washington. I think people who sit inside the Beltway and just sit in the ecosystem, they have breakfast with lobbyists and they have lunch with, the think tank people, and they're on the floor of the House and the Senate. All you do is talk to yourself. And as you said, Mark, there's kind of the, it's not us, it's them, it's Biden's fault, it's Harris' fault. It's the kind of force du jour of lies and disinformation that was so overwhelming. It was an anti-establishment tsunami. It's a communications issue, right? We just didn't talk about it in the right way. And then you have the cable news pundits that are almost with this, whatever, they're going to get what they deserve and go off a cliff. And if you're in the Beltway, those two groups dominate the conversation. But governors are outside of Washington. They are much more attuned to their people, right? The problems are all parochial. They tend to be out and about in their states a lot more. And I think that's where the kind of cultural disconnect, the economic disconnect, the idea that we've taken groups for granted, I think they're much more attuned to it. And I think, look at Josh Shapiro, not as a future candidate, but when Joe Biden said what he did about garbage, Josh Shapiro jumped out immediately with clarity and a strong statement that's absolutely, John Fetterman did the same thing. People who are outside the Beltway, who are in touch with their people, that is who I would want to put, up. And right now, that's Whitmer and Shapiro, Bashir, people like that.
Yeah, I'll tell you. Yeah, go ahead, Sean.
I was just going to say one quick thing. You mentioned it on Trump being outspent and all this. One takeaway it to me that I've talked about on my podcast that I continue to talk is I think one of the big winners was independent media, long form podcasts, platforms like this, that there is a recognition. And I reason I tie that in is I think this White House, you're going to see a very different briefing room. You're going to see a very different focus on who they talk to as a White House, because there's a recognition. Reagan really used local media at the time a lot effectively. And I think you're going to see independent media, long form media in this administration get utilized for the first time the way that the Obama team used social media.
And can I
I'm going to respond.
Because I didn't speak up on this point, because Mark, you said on earned media through the traditional media, Trump was just absolutely dominated with the press against him, except for about a 6-week period right after Harris got the nomination. Trump dominated social media this election cycle. His army of meme makers and the
100%.
to turn videos around, to drive a narrative of Biden was too old, then it was Harris's weak and liberal. They absolutely dominated that earned media. And I think some of it was organic and some of it was very well organized.
I agree. I'm going to comment on what Sean said and Dan said, then we're going to get to your question. So please, if you don't have your hand up, if you've never been involved, raised before, we'd love to get you in today. So please. Okay. I agree with Sean. And it's not just on the Republican side. I believe, unless I'm forgetting in my addled state, we are going to go 4 years without the president of the United States or the vice president doing an interview with the New York Times or the Washington Post with a news reporter, right? So they're cutting out the traditional press too, to some extent. And I agree. When the Clinton campaign came in, and I was new to covering the White House, and the old hand White House reporters would say to Dee Myers and George Stephanopoulos, "Well, this has never been done this way before." And Dee would be like, "Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's never been done this way before. That's the way we're going to do it." That's nothing compared to Trump in 17 and Trump in 25. Their attitude is they're going to no allegiance to, well, the network pool wants to do it this way because it's always been done this way. It's all going to be different. And podcasts and alternate. Go ahead, Sean.
3 quick things. One, I'll end with this, but 2 updates. There are reports that Kamala's team is in debt. You talked about money. The idea that after that much that they're in debt is going to be a crazy story. 2, just you mentioned Pennsylvania. I've had in the last hour talked to some very senior folks on that campaign, among the highest, who feel like that the text is very clear. Senator-elect McCormick feels very confident. And then last, I would just say, just to give you guys an idea of what Mark's talking about. And so in 2016, we met with the White House Correspondents Association, and they said to me, "This is how the briefings work. You come in, you start your briefing, and then when you're done, you call on the AP reporter first. You go down the row, and this is the kicker. And they said at a certain point, the AP person, because they are the status that they are given, will say, 'Thank you very much.' And that signals the end of your briefing." And I said, "Really?" Okay. So the first briefing that I held on that Monday, the real one, not the one we don't have to talk about the other one. The first person I called on was Daniel Halperin at that time at the New York Post as a hat tip to President Trump. And I worked from the back of the room forward. And then the AP reporter, I think it was Julie Pace at the time, said, "Thank you very much." And I turned and said, "Nope, thank you. I'm going to keep going," and went on. And the goal was to send a signal that we weren't here to play traditional rules. And I think most of America probably didn't pick up on any of that because they don't care who gets called on when. But the idea was to send a very clear signal early on that we weren't here to abide by traditional rules that the press has dictated to us.
I'll stay on the media for 1 second because it's, I think, super important. I'm, as you all know, a huge critic of how the media covered this campaign. But I also know that the New York Times is singular in America, in the world, really, because of the resources they have and the experience of their reporters. And I feel very torn. If I were Donald Trump's press secretary, I don't know that I'd give the New York Times a seat in the briefing room. In all honesty, I would say I'm going to give that seat to a podcaster who was fair to us, right? On the other hand, the New York Times is singular, and the New York Times, if it plays its traditional role, is one of the great guardians of the public interest. So it's going to be really interesting to see who gets seats, who gets called on, and then who gets interviews, who gets access, because vindictive White Houses of both parties, and make no mistake, the Biden communications operation was as vindictive as any I've ever heard of. They can say, well, you know what? Well, yeah, you can have a seat in the briefing room because we don't want to have that fight with the Correspondents Association. But maybe you're not getting all the email alerts about briefings. Maybe we're doing backgrounders from the Treasury Department and you're just not invited. Very easy to do that. And in some ways, it's vindictive and petty and it can be ideological. But I'll say again, for the sake of sanity and human nature and fairness, why should these organizations that did their best for 4 years to keep Donald Trump from winning, why should they be given priority in their access to cover the White House? I ask that rhetorically because again, I think I guarantee you that the Trump administration 2.0 will do things that the Correspondents Association and some of these big news organizations will say, oh, how dare you? And again, how dare they? How dare they
Well, and I think part
cover
of
the
this-
election the
It's
way
not
they
an
cover it?
either or, right?
So-
it has to be a both. And this is true when you ask me about where Democrats should go and who should they put forward. I really hope there's a lot less focus on Meet the Press and a lot more focus on how to win over Charlemagne God and his audience.
Yeah.
Because
You're look,
she fell into that trap of you got to talk to the press, you got to give CNN an interview. And by the time they moved on to podcasters and everyone else, early voting had started.
I think that look, when I went into, we had it's interesting because there was this, here's how the setup works. Here's how you have to structure things. And to some extent we dealt with that, but there is going to, if you get the right people, and this is why who he chooses, not just for press secretary, but getting some people in there with experienced hands. What Mark just brought up, just for people to understand, the White House press office gave the seating chart over in 1984 and said, you guys, we don't want to deal with it anymore. Who sits where? You guys figure it out. They get to still issue passes. So the White House decides who gets a day pass, a weekly pass, and a hard pass. But where you sit and the locations on the lawn, that's up to the Correspondents Association because we don't want to deal with that headache. And the reality is, to your point, Mark, we had a lot of discussions about a lot of different things, and I had to make the decisions about which glass did I want to break? How much did I want to break? How much did I, because it was me that was going to have to walk over it, right? And so there was a lot of people in the idea factory saying, kick this person, do this, do that. And I was like, you know what, guys? There are certain battles, like petty ones, like I said, who gets called on when, I can deal with, but I'm not going to deal with reassigning every seat. And it was only because how many battles do you want to fight? Now, I agree with you. If I were them this time, I'd say, knowing what we know now, let's fight that battle. We're not going to kick you out of the briefing room because I don't believe that that's how government should operate. But you're certainly not sitting in the front row, and we're certainly not going to bend over backwards because I'd rather give, all of these other people, independent media folks. I mean, and just one last quick thing that people understand. Corinne, my view as press secretary, if people wanted access to the briefing or whatever, I was an all of the above guy. I was like, if I give everybody access, I can't get in trouble, right? Because then I can say, I just gave it to everybody. I think that Corinne Jean-Pierre took away all of the hard passes of people who weren't credentialed to Capitol Hill, which is a much harder credential to get because it has to do with your funding as a media organization. And that went way over the heads of most people because, again, no one really cares except the independent media that does. I think the Trump White House should restore that, give more access, not less. So anyway, that's
they're all super interesting, and we're all benefiting greatly from Sean's experience. I'm appreciative of that. I'm probably too late for me to clarify because people will clip off what I said earlier. I'm not advocating they pull the New York Times press credential or their seat in the briefing room. I'm saying I could understand why they would, and until the New York Times and other places acknowledged the flaws in their coverage, I could imagine the Trump White House doing that. And I think just as a matter of market share, forget the unfairness. Rogan got, I don't know what's up to 50 million, whatever it is. Like these places, the legacy places, they don't have the same audience. And from Ari Fleischer to Sean Spicer to everybody else who worked in the Trump White House, they know how ideologically biased these places are. Why would you put your ideological enemies who are not full-time guardians of the public interest? Why would you privilege them over places who have growing audiences and are not ideologically hostile? Now, it would be a huge mistake. And if you clip what I say today on social media or on our website, please include this part. I want guardians of the public interest in there. I don't want a bunch of toadies to Donald Trump asking all the questions. That would be horrible for the public. But what I would understand is if the Trump people said, these people have declining market share and they're hostile to us, why should they get to ask all the questions? I want people like me who are guardians of the public interest, regardless of the party, asking tough, fair questions. That's who should be credentialed. That's who should be given access. That should be called on primarily. The partisans can get access to. I hope I'm clear. Just quickly, because I want to get to everybody's questions. Governors, in the abstract, Dan, I totally agree with you. Governors, where the rubber meets the road, dealing with real problems, not caught up in Washington. It is virtually impossible for governors to get regular coverage. Even Gavin Newsom, superstar, good hair, 3,000 miles away, wrong time zone. In Harrisburg, in Lexington, is that the capital of Kentucky? Frankfurt. It's very hard to get coverage if you're a governor. Even if you're Ann Richards or Cuomo, it's very hard. The press is not there with you every day. And these governors, I say, I'll paint with a broad brush, doesn't apply to all of them. A lot of them are ambivalent. They've got families. Most of the current governors have younger families. They've got families. They've got the government to run. They have personal lives. They don't necessarily want to add another job, which is national spokesperson. And they're, again, painting with a broad brush. A lot of them are not as good as you think. A lot of them are unsophisticated. And if they do try to play at the top level, they get tough questions they can't answer. I once saw a governor who was touted as a presidential candidate. He ran for president. He thought of himself as super sophisticated. And he went to an event with the national media and they asked him a question about federal policy. And his answer I summarize here was humana, humana, humana. Like these governors know their states. They don't necessarily know what it takes to be a national spokesperson. This bill in Congress, this previous piece of legislation, this federal executive order. So great governors. But if you're not a once in a generation talent like Bill Clinton, who doesn't mind adding, not as his third job, but primarily his first job, be in the national conversation, be the head of the DGA, be the head of the NGA. If you're not in that category, it's very hard to lead the party as a governor, in my experience.
And look, one of the problems for the Democratic Party is like in 2004, when there was somewhat of a similar result, there was a young guy named Barack Obama who got elected in Illinois. If you look across the map, there are not like young stars that you're like, okay, even in that blue state, you know, maybe Andy Kim in New Jersey, but he's been a House member. You can't say Adam Schiff in California. You know, he is who he is. When you look in Congress, yes, there will be people who will rush to the microphones always and forever. But, you know, that bench is a little thin. But I'll be curious to see, because most Democrats right now think 2026 will be a great time to run because they think there will be blowback against Trump like there was in 2018. So which, you know, House member or other thinks about jumping for the Senate or running at home for governor, who will want to be on MSNBC at 1 o'clock in the Rotunda to start building that brand and defining themselves?
We went on for 37 minutes. I found it fascinating what these two guys were saying. I enjoyed it. Some people only want to hear from the community. Some people think the whole show should be the three of us talking. We didn't bounce it the way we usually do. Went a little bit over, but let's get to you now, and every day will be different. Margaret, welcome in. Thank you for joining. Tell folks who don't know where you are, who you voted for president, and what's on your mind, please.
Good morning. I'm Margaret from Texas. I voted for Trump, and I did red down the ballot for this election. I wanted really quick to, I just want to give Kamala props for her speech yesterday. I thought it was the most heartfelt and authentic speech I have seen her give for the entire campaign. She felt relieved to me in a very interesting way. But I thought, man, if she could have done that during the campaign, I think she would have been a little bit better. And also, I have a question. Who pays that debt? If someone's campaign is in debt, like John was saying, who pays that?
That's an awesome question because the law changed. And so in the business, it used to be that, you know, whatever. Now it's the candidate is personally liable for that debt. So that's why it's a really great question that you just asked. The law changed. And so there are a lot of people who have run in the last couple cycles that still owe a lot of money. And the way it works is, so, you know, I have a mail business that I'm a partner in. If the debt goes over, a lot of times you'll try to make a deal and you'll go to your vendors and say, hey, look, we're out of money. We're going to keep raising it. You know, we can prolong this for a while. We owe you $100,000. what if we give you 60 in the next 2 months and you'll cut a deal? And you say, fine. There's also the element of, you've got this FEC compliance, so that you've got to be careful about what you give away, because there's a legality to this as well. So it's a really interesting question that you're asking, that is a combination of business and law of what you can. Now, you can't just give it away without
Right.
reporting it. I mean, but then there's the corporate piece of this. So great question. And that's the problem with candidates, is that they're on the hook, and they go, so now you've got her and second gentleman probably like, hey guys, what's going on here? They'll try to raise it. They'll send out fundraising appeals and, hey, help me retire the debt, or I'll host a fundraiser of some sort. But and then they'll cut deals with their vendors.
I have
Yeah,
one more question. Oh, I'm sorry,
I
Dan,
was
go
going to
ahead.
say,
And Dan's the finance guy, by the way.
it actually used to be a strategy of people who thought they were going to win, because once they got in office, and you don't traditionally raise as much the first, 6 months for a House member, the first year for a senator, up in 6 years, you would raise that down. So you would intentionally go into debt. Like people, this was always true in primaries, because, not to get too into it, but you have two separate accounts, a primary account and general account. And you would strategically say, because certain donors would not write to you if you had a primary, or if you were going against a challenger, the business community historically would not want to support you. I don't know how much they're in debt, Sean, so I'll have to look this up, but they must have thought that perhaps they were going to win, and that they would just pay this down, and the DNC would kick in because it would be her entity. So we're going to miss.
Yeah. Margaret, your other question real quick, please.
I want to know y'all's take on if Obama's influence over the Democrat Party is pretty much done. When he was out on the campaign trail and he was blatantly repeating, like, the very fine people, the stuff that had been very well debunked by both the left and the right. I just feel like, he had kind of a hold on it for a little while, but I really feel like it's waning. And who's going to be the next, I don't know if it's a legacy Democrat, but that space feels kind of empty, and like the whole party is kind of clamoring, trying to figure out, what comes next and who comes next. But I do think that they have to figure out, like, a platform like this, the heartbeat of American people, because I really feel like they completely missed the mark on what most people care about in this entire election. And the things that they focused on were such fringe things that there was a huge repudiation of all of it from the American people.
Yeah. Margaret, great question. I don't think Barack Obama cares to be involved. I think if his friend hadn't been the nominee, he would have stayed even less involved. And I think he doesn't like to take over the far left. The far left, with the exception of Bernie, has been pretty quiet so far, but they're not going to accept. I don't think the far left is so much more powerful than they were in 1989 and 90, when Bill Clinton brought the party back to the center. There was no social media, all this stuff that gives them all this power now. So I don't think Barack Obama wants to take on the far left, and moving the party to the center would require that. But who replaces them, as we discussed earlier? I think that's one of their biggest problems now. Politics is about ideas, it's about issues, but it's a lot about people. And I don't see a generational talent willing to take on the far left and develop centrist ideas that appeal to the working class. So I don't think it'll be Barack Obama, but I don't know who it will be. And I think it's just a big problem. And again, they're facing a guy who's got all levels of power, moves 80 miles an hour, 800 miles an hour, and doesn't show much mercy. Margaret, thank you for joining. Appreciate
Thank you,
it.
guys.
Bella, welcome
Bye.
in. Tell folks where you are, who you're supporting, who you supported rather, and what's on your
Wow.
mind.
So I'll answer all the questions. I found you through the fifth column because I love them, even though the drinking talk gets a little on my nerves. I wrote in 16. In 2020, I didn't vote, and I voted Trump. I'm in New York, so it really doesn't mean anything. So my question really has to do with the diversity. Everybody talks about diversity. How about diversity of opinions? What's the chance that Trump, I'm sorry, I have a cold, so I'm a little stuffed.
Oh, you're
What's
great.
the chance that Trump will find somebody in the Democratic Party with some good ideas? And if he actually does that, will the Democratic Party, if this person accepts it, ever forgive them for it? How do you get to that? And the other thing I want to say is the people I think who should pay Kamala's bill are the 12 people sitting in the cigar who decided that she should be the one to run.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Guys, what do you think of that? Thank you for that question, those questions.
I think, Trump attracted RFK and Tulsi Gabbard, and I don't think they were unimportant. And I think they will likely serve, whether kind of officially or unofficially, they'll continue to be active supporting President Trump. I would imagine there will be some Democrats who will renounce their membership in the party. This kind of always happens when there's big movements like this, like local state reps and stuff who maybe then will see an opportunity in Trump to, just stick it to Democrats, will embrace it. As far as the Democratic Party trying to attract Republicans, if your goal is to win elections, we have to attract his voters. And I would hope that that will be part of the calculation going forward, particularly as the DCCC, the House and Senate campaigns looking at those midterms. Whoever those leaders are, their job is to figure out how to put a new coalition together.
Son.
I would just say, I think that that Tulsi and RFK were probably were extremely effective as surrogates because they brought constituencies along with them that weren't traditional to the Republican base. I believe RFK. I think I mentioned this yesterday. RFK came to visit Trump in 2016, and the staff did everything to get him out. I wasn't part of that, but I'm not trying. There were people around him that didn't want him involved. I believe that he will play a role this time. I just don't know that those are very unique situations in terms of Democrats coming in to help him. Anyway, I think he, of all of them, will play a role. I think he has a huge constituency, but I don't know that translates to beyond people who love RFK, right? I don't think they're a traditional Democratic base, if you will. It's not like, Bobby or Ted or, this he has a very unique following. And I don't think it's Democratic linear, if you will. So anyway, that's the extent to which I think you're going to see that play out.
But the point is that
base is part of the Bernie base that is clearly splintering apart. So in that regard, I think it's not unimportant.
Yeah, no, it's important. I just don't think I don't think it's going to flood a bunch of Democrats. I think there's a lot of people union workers, as we saw in particular, who might have been historical Democrats, traditional Democrats, family oriented, like they grew up in their family and suddenly are breaking away. But that was happening regardless of the surrogates.
Bella, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thanks for joining. All right. Bringing in two folks, Zach, who's a Harris supporter, and Roger. Roger, you go first. Tell folks where you are who don't know who you're supporting and what's on your mind, and then Zach.
Unmute.
Yes, sir.
I supported Trump this time, and in the spirit of peace, love, and understanding, I've got a couple of comments and then some questions. So my first comment is, and I think you guys kind of hit on it a little bit. I love what you guys are doing. As you know, Mark, I've talked to you about it. I love being able to bring both sides in, but I feel like the one failing that happened during the course of what you've done on two-way is I think you were all, and I love hearing from you guys, Sean, I think it's great, a little bit too plugged in and too reliant on historic ties to establishment media. And talked before about being more plugged into what's going on in Substack. Had people looked at what was going on in Substack from about 2 to 3 years ago, you would have seen this coming a mile away. People saw this coming in the Black community, in the Latino community, in the younger community. It was coming from a mile away, and people just refused to look at it. This, in turn, ties into the comment that I think you guys rightly made, as to what is the future of the press corps going to look like. When you look at institutions like CNN, which is almost bankrupt, MSNBC, I mean, the horrific coverage. I wonder who's going to be out in front. I think Joe Rogan, I think Ben Shapiro, I think some of the the equivalents on the left have far more coverage, growing faster, are listened to and believed far more than
All
the
right,
other.
all right, Roger. Okay, Roger, hold on. We got it. Sean, and then Dan, respond to that.
I
Hold on,
just say,
Roger.
it's an interesting thing that you bring up. I gave a speech at a Florida International University, I don't know, 6-7 weeks ago to their journalism school, and one of the professors said, what do you think about how journalism is dying? And I said, it's not dying, it's flourishing. Go to Substack. Look at Barry Weiss and a lot of these folks who have
Very
left,
right.
CNN on the right and the left, or just traditional journalists that just care about. Tom Lobianco from 24 site broke a bunch of news. The proliferation of people who want to be straight journalists, who want to be left leaning, right leaning. Look at this platform. I have a show. Mark does Two-Way at Night. I mean, I think it's awesome. And I think you're right. And I think this, as I said earlier, this administration, I think is going to capitalize on it.
I
Dan,
just,
Yeah,
hold on,
I
Roger, hold on, Roger, hold on. Dan.
pollsters too.
so
You're
so
looking-
Roger, I will respectfully push back pretty starkly on what you said. I think Substack is also full of progressives that did not see this coming whatsoever. It's what we've been talking about now in the last few weeks. Yours truly, and I know, and I'll let Mark speak for himself a little, but I know he took a lot of heat, and I have taken an exceptional amount of heat the last month and a half for speaking honestly about the faults of the Democratic Party. And I have been accused of not cheerleading hard enough, that I was blind to what was really happening in this country, that there was a Democratic, wave, or 50.1% would just never vote for Donald Trump. And Mark, did focus groups that he talked very much about in the spring that highlighted problems that ended up, again, we will not always be right. No one bats 1,000 in the predictive markets. We would be rich beyond our dreams if that was true. But we very much have challenged both parties' orthodoxy, spoke very candidly about the shortcomings of the parties. We have paid prices. I have almost lost friendships and almost lost my family, not lost, but was disinvited almost from Thanksgiving. I'm not, but they came close, because I kept saying, you guys need to look at, the data and look at what's happening. So respectfully, I believe this platform has been pretty honest. And the chat will back it up.
Yeah. Hold on, Roger, hold on, Roger, because we're running out of time. We got to get Zach in.
Can I ask
So
my
Roger,
question?
go ahead.
So I totally appreciate what you said. I think you missed my point, but my last question is, I seriously wonder who the head of the Democratic Party is going forward. I
Yeah.
am
There
absolutely
isn't one.
looking
All
at
right,
it.
Roger, you got a quick question, ask it, but we already addressed the question extensively.
The quick question is, could the Democratic Party break apart over this complete catastrophe?
They won't. They won't. I promise they won't. Roger, thank you. Floria, who's on and has her hand up, and I hope we have time to get to her. Any Democrat who didn't want to listen to Dan or me or Sean about what might have had what we thought was going to happen, I hope they listened to Floria, but they probably didn't. And we'll get Floria in 1 second. But Floria, my point is, Roger, I think we all agree with your critique. We just don't think it applies to this platform or us. I think we read plenty of Substack. Roger, hold on. Zach, welcome in. What's on your mind?
Am I muted? Hey, so I am based in California normally, although I've been in Taiwan for the past 3 months, and I was supporting Harris, including a little bit of phone banking, and I've basically supported Democrats since I could vote. So John Kerry, Obama, Clinton, Biden. I did donate to Ron Paul once, and I got endless pushback from my liberal friends, but I just wanted him to win the nomination and then lose in the general. My main question, go ahead.
No, just go ahead and get to your question if you would. Thank you.
Yeah, the question is, how deep do you think the lack of understanding in the Democratic leadership or anywhere else in the left half of the country goes? Are there people who get what Dan said a week ago on Donald Trump's appeal and the stuff you talk about, Mark, but they just won't say it publicly? Or is it everyone
Zach,
doesn't get it?
It's the best question. I really don't know the answer. Why do you think Donald Trump won, Zach?
Because of inflation in the economy and immigration. I looked at a bunch of Pew polls on how those were the top issues, and I just thought it was crazy, the whole campaign. It's like you're running on abortion, which is a mid-range issue, and you're not running very strongly on the economy, which is the top issue. So it just felt backwards.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to say that, but here we see the result.
Yeah. My quick answer to your great question is I think most of them don't get it. They're just culturally and politically removed from the reality that we talk about here so often. That's my sense. Dan and then Sean and then Floria will close us out.
Yeah, I think Mark's largely right. But I have said this a few times recently. I am very curious to hear what happened in that. David Plouffe and that senior leadership is very data driven. There was no shortage of people from the outside and the inside screaming, you got to address inflation, you got to define yourself. And you saw one thing in the New York Times today, that they debated for 2 weeks a strategic direction after that debate, and the candidate didn't want to make her mind up, which is something Mark has talked about for a while. Why did they not address what was screaming at them in the data? I will be very curious.
Sean.
I'll just say it real quickly, and this goes back to what I said about the RNC and what we did in 2012. There's several groups of people. You saw like the Richie Torreses of the world that we showed earlier, the Bernie Sanders that are in their own mindset. They have a view of what mattered, what didn't, because of where they represent, where do they live. I think the question is, are you willing to? I think we, after 2012, were willing to let other people go out, tell us, and then accept the data. But like anything, whether you go to see a doctor or some other professional that gives you an analysis, here's the problem. Are you going to accept it? Will you listen to their recommendations? And that's the $1 million question. I think that they can do this. They can get the data and the analysis. Will you listen or not? So that's what it's going to come down to. Are the professionals willing to say, I get it, like this didn't work, or we got to do better on that, or are they going to just double down on what they personally think? And that's going to be the $1 million question.
Yeah. Zach, thank you. So Flora, I'm so grateful to you as my fellow Gotham City resident for when you spoke on the program initially, because you're one person, you don't speak for necessarily hundreds of millions, but I think when you spoke to us, you spoke for tens of millions, and you contributed to my belief that Donald Trump was probably going to win and maybe win big. So welcome back. Would love to hear what your experience has been like from election night till now in terms of your own thoughts and in terms of your community.
Well, I voted, of course, I voted for Donald Trump. Most people I know in my community, they voted for Harris. And then there was a segment of voters who did not vote at all. I did encourage people to vote down ballot. If you don't want to vote for the president, that's one thing, but you need to, because I'm just speaking for the community that I live in, and I live in Central Harlem. It's not cheap living in Central Harlem. Okay, I think as a community we do have to better educate. I think we need to start educating people on the importance of voting, and there were a lot of little things, judges and things like that. These things are important. I think we need to better educate everyone, not just my community, but everyone, on the importance of local voting. I didn't get beat up too bad about voting Trump because I do come from a Republican and independent family who transitioned from Democrat years ago. I just did so just now. My question is for Dan. I mean, other people have brought this up as well. Where does the Democrat Party go from here? Because I see the legacy media digging their heels in. It doesn't look like they want to bridge with the Republican Party, who is now looking like the big tent party. They're looking like the party of inclusive. It's going to be diverse just by nature of them being inclusive. The Democrat Party, I even said in the chat, Kamala Harris is supposed to be the de facto leader of the party. but her speech, she seemed like she's out of here. And it's like, who's running the White House now? The country to me seems like we have no leadership, unfortunately, unless we look to Donald Trump, and he's not the president as yet.
Yeah.
I mean, it just, everything seems a little unbalanced.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that the Democrat Party can reel in the legacy media, which, in my opinion, is the sole. They're the sole factor to keeping us apart and really damaging the voters. They're suggesting that people who voted for Trump have little to no moral compass and that they must come in and save us, and they're blaming platforms like yours and Joe Rogan's and social media for influencing us as if we don't have a brain of our own. I don't see how this is going to be beneficial to the Democratic Party going forward. They
Great.
have to reel them in.
Yeah. So Dan, it's true. If Democrat goes on MSNBC right now, they're not pressed to say, how are you going to fix the party? They talk about how the tariffs are going to hurt working people. So Dan, what's your reaction to what Flora asked?
Yeah, just two things. Legacy media is dying for many reasons. One of which is attracting new readers or viewers. So to your point, you would think they would think about how to reach a more diverse audience. The second part, I would say to all Democrats, is take a deep breath. When you lose the White House, this is what happens. You second guess who is our leader. It's good to not know. In 2012, I've said this before. Nobody would have said in January of 13, aha, Donald Trump will lead us to the most diverse coalition and dominate the next 12 years of politics. Nobody would have said that.
That's true.
So I don't know. I know there's no lack of ambition in our party. And I believe, because I always believe that people get it right, somebody will emerge and somebody will have a message. It may not be in 28. We will move forward. We will move forward.
Flora, thank you. Thank you for coming back. Appreciate it. All right. Ran a little bit over. Apologize for that. Tonight I'll be on at 6 o'clock Eastern time on two-way tonight. Join me then if you can. We'll be back 9 a.m. tomorrow for this program. Brian was here today. If you want to contribute to two-way, you can go to our website. Brian was here, but we ran out of time. Brian, I'm hoping you can come back tomorrow and update us on the farm because there's some good farm updates as well. So if for no other reason, join us on our last episode of the week to hear about the farm. Sean, closing comments. You're muted for some reason, so I'll mute you.
Sorry, there was a gentleman doing landscape work outside, and I didn't want the entire two-way community to have to hear it. I think we're gonna look. If you were interested in the election, I think you're gonna find out a lot on this platform for the next little while about transition, jobs, between the connections that we all have. I mean, I'm excited about the conversation going forward. This is what I love. Not just the campaign part, but now the machinations of how everything's going to go. Who's going to staff the White House, the transition projects. So I'm excited to keep this conversation going, and a lot going to happen. I mean, just the text that before the show, Dan and I were talking. It's actually, if you want to know what's really happening on the inside, I think we're going to have a lot to offer, because the angling for jobs, the power plays and struggles that are playing out are going to be fascinating.
Yes. And everything Sean said is true, and not least because Donald Trump tends to offer every position to at least 3 people. And at some point,
I was going to say, I said to somebody last night, quick funny story, I won't name the names, but there was a cabinet position offered to somebody, and a family member walked somebody else in about 40 minutes after that. And I was called up and said, put out a release. They're going to be, and I was like, okay, I'll have to switch the name of the release then. But it's going to be a wild time.
Donald Trump runs transitions like no other, because when you promise 3 different people the same job, something has to give. Dan.
Yeah, just I am very much planning to dig into where the Democratic Party goes from here, and just to keep documenting it, to keep trying to listen to all the different people out there, all the different angles of paths for the party that are offered. planning to go down to DC a few times here to talk to people, and just, to all the Democrats on here, raise your hand, tell us what you think. The way Trump supporters of, new and old have been raising their hands, I think they were proud to say why they were voting for him. Raise your hand, be proud, offer your thoughts of where you think the Democratic Party should go. And, our party will figure it out.
Yeah, we have big plans for two-way, big plans for this program, which we'll be telling you about in the coming days and weeks. But one thing, as Dan just suggested, we want this to be the place where there's a robust conversation about the future of the Democratic Party, where people have ideas. Who should the leaders be? What should the ideas be? How to deal with the Trump administration. So we're excited. We hope you'll stay with us every day. And again, we'll see you here 9 a.m. tomorrow, and I'll see you at 6 o'clock tonight for two-way tonight. Brian, come back tomorrow. We'll update the farm. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.